question is not, are we being discipled? It's who is discipling us.
Yeah, definitely.
Even at a Christian school, I don't think we're immune from culture discipling us. Teachers, parents, students, our kids. Culture has a way of subconsciously influencing us.
Yeah.
And no Christian school is immune from this. It's not like this is a special reality here at the King's Academy. And my thought for the podcast was that this was our school's way, via the Institute, of ensuring that the TKA family knows who is discipling them. Is it culture or is it Christ?
Yeah. And become, I think the key is becoming aware that there is, that we are being, in some way that culture is impacting us. I mean, obviously we know social media, we know television, we know these things are bringing messages to us, and we are just kind of intuitively receiving those messages if we're not careful, and so Christ gets pushed aside in a lot of ways if we're not careful.
Yeah, intuitively. The culture's power, how strongly it's influencing us is expressed in the lack of a question.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
It subconsciously subverts. It's not always the stuff that is blatantly not Christian. It's the stuff we don't even notice.
Yeah,
that
definitely.
Under the currents of culture's waves are shaping our desires, our wants, our habits, and then we find ourselves with this orientation towards something in life that doesn't look anything like Christ, and we go, how did I get here?
Yeah.
And that's just it. The question was asked too late, and culture has already shaped you. You've already been discipled in a direction. And so I like that word,
intuitive.
It just doesn't, the discipleship, even with Christ, doesn't always happen so overtly. It's sometimes caught a little more subliminally than we're maybe we realize or are even comfortable with.
And it's caught more than taught, right? In a lot of ways. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's that's something that we we need to be aware of. My father used to say something that used to drive me crazy. It used to be, do what I say, not what I do. And it's like that's totally opposite of anything as human beings we actually we're made to do, right? I mean, we catch things, especially as children, and we, as a school community, we really need to make our kids aware of this as well. And I think parents, when you're aware of it, your children will be more aware of it as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess the one way I kind of process it in my mind is like these unthought thoughts, these unthoughts about culture, instead of the questions, just making them thoughts. That's it, like you said, just getting it to where we're aware of its discipling influence on our lives. That's a big step forward.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's what we're doing on this podcast. We are trying to figure out who's discipling us. Is it Christ or is it culture? And it's hard. And so that's why we have special guest speakers, because they usually know what to do and I don't know what to do. So if I can start with a question for you.
Yes.
Okay. So you, and I think this is so helpful, and some people might be familiar with this, but you compare the Christian to a floating iceberg. All right.
Yeah, I would say that really all people are icebergs. And so we have at the foundation of that our beliefs, and then the next layer is kind of our values, and then the top layers are actions. And kind of the way I describe it is that we often are...
So beliefs
are foundation.
Values,
actions.
Yeah.
And I often describe it in this way to my students. I used to teach it to, the movie Titanic, and so we would, you have Rose and Jack on the deck, if you've seen the movie, and all of a sudden they pan to a guy looking out, and he yells iceberg. And so the captain is turning, and all of a sudden, as they turn, they hit something, but just a few ice particles fall on the deck. And it kind of gives you the picture of that they averted disaster. But what happens is that below the surface, the whole bottom of the boat has been ripped to shreds. And so, in a sense, what we know about icebergs is that probably 75% of an iceberg is actually under the surface. And that's kind of what our beliefs and values are. They're under the surface. But our actions, the top of the iceberg, are visible. And those are the things that we see. The way people live out their beliefs and values are the actions. And so that's kind of what we see. And also we kind of describe it as floating, because culture kind of takes us one way or another. And so
the culture being the waves that it's sort of submerged in.
Yes, yeah.
This iceberg we're calling, well, people, and whether they're Christians or not.
Yeah,
but
that we're all being, the beliefs and values really dictate our actions in a lot of ways. We also talk about it, and we might mention this a little later probably, but just in terms of narratives, that really beliefs and values are our meta-narrative, or the big story, and actions are kind of the micro-narratives, the way we live out the big story. The beliefs and values. So you bring up the idea of the two fish with this as well. We've talked about that before.
Yeah, because I like your iceberg, because the way we tend to think of ourselves is like this buffered self. We're sort of untouched by what's around us. We think of ourselves so individualistically, but really we're very porous. And I feel like that's why I like the iceberg analogy, because what you realize is you really are swimming in a sea of what you call meta-narratives. And those different meta-narratives, those different waves are pushing you here and there, and you actually have a verse on that. Can you share that?
Well, I have the...
Wait, do I have that
You
verse?
have Ephesians 4, yeah.
Okay. So I just want to read this for everybody. Ephesians 4, I think it's 14. Paul says, then we will no longer... He's talking about growing in the full knowledge of God's Son. And then he says, we will no longer be little children, tossed by the waves and blown around by every wind of teaching, by human cunning with cleverness in the techniques of deceit. And I feel like that's such a biblical analogy. But what I like about it as well is it reveals to us that we're not on an island. We are more influenced by these meta-narratives flowing around than we'd like to admit. And I think we'd be comfortable admitting. And that's why I like that, because, there are obviously some icebergs that are big enough that seem stable, and they're not sort of swimming around out there. But then you get those ice flows that do get pushed around, and so the question really is, which are we here? Do we have that stability or not? And I think a big part of achieving that in culture as a Christian, not just in our thinking, but in our valuing. You use the word value, I say desires, and our behavior is actually just realizing that we're an iceberg surrounded by these really strong currents. If we would just get that, I think that's a big step in the right direction.
Oh, definitely. I think that's the key, right? Is becoming aware and becoming aware of them. And that, like you said, I think that's what we're trying to accomplish is helping people at the King's Academy to become aware of that. Because I think sometimes we think we're kind of this little fortress in some ways, where Christ is king, yes, but nothing else is going to kind of penetrate that. But we leave this fortress to go home, and in our communities and different places where we're being pushed and moved in that water.
Yeah. You asked me about the analogy of the two fish swimming. The story goes, there's two fish swimming along, and an older fish swims by, and he says, "How's the water, boys?" And they look at each other and they go, "What is water?"
Yeah.
Right? There's the point of it is that we're most unaware of what is kind of closest to us.
Right.
And I go back to a story of me and my wife where we used to live near a railroad track. And it was loud. Every time the train would go by, it'd shake the whole house, okay? And friends would come over, okay? Just to modernize the analogy. Friends would come over, and they'd be like, "Doesn't that bother you?" Like, what are you talking about? What bothers us? I don't know. The train. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, the train. It's just there's a after a while, we just got so accustomed to it, we just never questioned it. We just were never, and I feel like that is really where the power of culture is. That is where it shapes us. And it shapes us under the waters, where it does its shaping, how it forms the iceberg we call ourselves, our beliefs, our values, our actions, is in the undercurrent. And it's those things that are hardest to pay attention to. We see everything happening in the streets. That's obvious. But in some sense, like you're saying, because it's obvious, it's not the most dangerous thing. The most dangerous thing are those unthought thoughts.
Right.
And there's a sense in which sometimes we are so surrounded by these different cultural narratives that are contrary to the gospel that we just kind of become immune to them. And we end up absorbing them. And they end up shaping us in ways we never thought imagined.
Yeah.
And I truly think it's in order to actually address this, we have to start thinking about ourselves differently as disciples. Like, our anthropology is wrong, because we tend to think of ourselves like bobbleheads. Like, we've got this big head and these little bodies. I remember going to every Phillies game growing up, every bobblehead night, trying to get a bobblehead. Okay, great. I got 1 million of them in my classroom, but I look at that and I kind of think, that's kind of how we think of ourselves, that very Descartesian, I think therefore I am sort of image of ourselves. But I don't think we are like that. I mean, unless, I don't know if you agree with me on this point, but I think we're more desiring creatures.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Like, and that, see, it's easy to know, to discover what culture's beliefs are. And I think it's easy to identify how it influences us there, because that's where we tend to emphasize. That's what we tend to emphasize, and that's because that's kind of how we see ourselves. We're these very rational beings with these big brains, and well, culture thinks that, but I think this. And we tend to think of discipleship that way too. If we just put all the right ideas in their heads, then the kids will start to, they'll become more like Christ, and we all know that's false. Like, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I think we process culture the same way. And we think, well, okay, I know culture thinks this, but I think this, so I'm good here. Because
check the box.
Yeah, because But I think more dangerous is the effect it's having on our desires, because we're often not thinking about ourselves as opposed to beliefs. We're not thinking about ourselves as desiring beings. Like beings who love first. And then we rationalize what we love afterward.
Yeah.
I think we had talked about this before. Your Bible talks about our anthropology this way. This might sound familiar to you. Can I read this? and then I know you want to butt in, if I can find it.
Well, I'm just thinking in terms of idols, right? We've talked about idols before, and so it's like what culture is tending to, what Christ should be ultimate to us, but all these good things that culture is saying that they're good, and we agree that they're good, but what culture wants to do is put it above and put them as ultimate, and pretty soon, all of a sudden, money is more important than God. Pretty soon, my toys are more important than God. And so because culture is really pressing that on us, I guess that's an example.
Pressing that want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pressing that desire or want on us. Yeah.
That's a whole, we got to have that conversation before we close today. We can't lose that thought. Just to speak into what you just said there, Proverbs 4:23, guard your heart above all else, for it is the source of life.
Yeah.
You know, when Jesus in John 1:38, I think, asks his soon-to-be disciples approach him, and he asks them, I think before he calls them officially, he says, what do you want? Right? He doesn't say, what do you know? What do you believe? Give me your creed.
Yeah.
He says, what do you want?
point,
What do you desire? Like the biblical anthropology seems to be that. And I think to our own detriment, if we don't think of ourselves that our desires and our emotions as a fundamental part of what it means to be a human. Again, the non-bobblehead view. We're in danger of missing ways culture might be influencing us.
And it's a combination, because remember, beliefs and values are below the surface, right?
Yeah.
It's not beliefs and then values and actions. They're
Yeah.
both below the surface.
Exactly.
They're both important part of that
Yeah.
meta-narrative for
Yeah.
us, I think.
Yeah, there's plenty of people who are plenty of Christians who are completely unconscious of what they're believing, let alone what they're desiring.
Right.
So it goes on. But I think given our family here, and given the kind of students we have here, I think and given the fact that we're a school, we probably do
that's a big
emphasize
part.
the rational more than,
Yeah.
if I just put all those ideas in there, that'll
Right.
work.
Right.
That's just not how a human being operates.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
it's funny that we think that way.
Yeah.
I think that way about myself even.
Well, part of it is we have, as a Christian school, taken on the mindset of the culture in terms of how to educate, right?
Yeah.
So we have to be aware of that even.
Yeah, if the text is giving us a different biblical anthropology, we have to consider that in our philosophy of education.
Right.
You said worship. See, because I think that's exactly why you're on this podcast right now, is because you saw that. It's not so much that it's influencing us just, just to influence us. It has a telos, that influence. It has an orientation, it has a goal, and that goal is worship. And you're right, it does orient our desires often to a good thing. Like you were mentioning, money.
Money.
I don't know what else you said. Whatever, money.
Okay, we'll go with money.
Not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
Right.
But it was never meant to be an ultimate thing.
Right.
The problem is when we take those good things and we make them ultimate things, they tend to spoil on us and ruin us.
Well, we even get that mixed up in Scripture, right? Because we say that money is the root of all evil. It never says that. It says the love of money is the root of all evil.
That's exactly the point.
Yeah.
That is that, and what culture does at that sort of underwater level is slowly change our sort of default setting and changing our passions, what we immediately gravitate to, and what we want and crave and orient our whole lives around. Like you said with the iceberg, if you want to know what that is, just look at the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Because what your behavior is going to tell you what that ultimate thing is. Period.
Yeah.
Okay, can I read this?
Yep.
So this is see what you think about this, because I think
All right.
he's saying the same thing. This writer I'm going to share with you, David Foster Wallace, the same thing you're saying, but he's a non-Christian.
Right. Yeah.
And he had a pretty unfortunate death, but he was a great writer. And during one of his
commencement. One of the
Yeah, it might have been a
I thought it
commencement
was.
speech. He says this. I want to get your thought on this.
Okay.
Okay. He says, this is right in the middle. He's all over the place in this commencement speech. It's like, it's completely scatterbrained and random. But he says, here's something else that's true. He says, in the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody does. The only choice we get is what to worship, if we're aware.
Yeah.
And an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship, be it JC, Jesus Christ, or Allah, or Yahweh, or the wicked mother goddess of the Four Noble Truths, or some, okay, he goes on and on here, is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive.
Yeah.
That's what you were saying about ultimate things and good things. If you worship money and things, if they are what you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough. Never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you'll always feel ugly, and when time and age start showing, you'll die a million deaths before they finally plant you. On one level, we all know this stuff already. It's been codified in myths, proverbs, cliches, etc. The skeleton of every great story. The trick is keeping the truth up front in daily consciousness. Worship power, and you will feel weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to keep that fear at bay. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, and you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, and always on the verge of being found out, and so on. He says, look, the insidious thing about these forms of worship is not that they're evil.
Right.
This is
Good things.
someone else just from the reality of life coming to the same conclusion here, right? It's not that they're evil or sinful. It is that they are unconscious. Their default settings. They're the kind of worship you just gradually slip into without even knowing. Day after day, getting more and more selective about what you see and how you measure value without ever being fully aware that that's what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that it's not just that culture. What you're saying is it's not just that culture is discipling us. It is telling us what to worship. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, television commercials every day, right, are
Sure.
telling us that you won't be happy unless you have this brand of toilet paper. Even it seems like anymore. That just came to mind. Sorry.
I take toilet paper
Cereal, whatever.
seriously. Why are you looking at me and saying toilet paper and cereal? Those are important things in my life. I think that is really getting to the root at what we're going to be trying to do here on this podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
And really in this whole institute is make us aware of this phenomenon that is going on under the waters.
Yeah.